So I was almost there. I want to thank everybody for coming. This is a very interesting program on geothermal energy and Hawaii, and it's just amazing the enormous advances that have been made in the last 100 years and within the last 15 years in this area. And what people were thinking about was science fiction, basically, is now coming true. And much of it is because of the remarkable work that's been done here in Hawaii that many people don't know about. So I'd like to thank you all for being part of this. And we'll just begin with Stan. You want to begin, Stan?
I think you wanted to make a comment too about the comments of the presenters are their own comments and not reflecting any special policy or anything from Renew Rebuild Hawaii. And we like the forum being open so everybody has a chance to speak exactly about what it's in their heart. So I still don't see Eugene popping up, but a lot of people are popping in. So Eugene, if you're out there, we're gonna let you go first if you're on. If you're not on, we have all our presenters ready and we're ready to go. Okay, I don't see Eugene rolling in, so Millilani, I guess she'll be going first. Our first presenter is Millilani Trask, who I actually have been following for a long time, but I was watching another presentation she did, and she just absolutely amazed me with how much she was interested in geothermal and also hydrogen. I think the big surprise for me was hydrogen, because she's made the connection that you have to store energy, especially when you don't have fossil fuels to store it in. So she's got a legal background, a legislative background, and it's really important to understand where her perspective on where we stand with geothermal. So Millilani, the stage is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to thank those who worked so hard to bring this to a reality. And I wanted to also thank Stan and Mike for all the work that they've done these last few weeks to assemble this panel as we go forward, sharing our visions on how Hawaii as a state and a place will achieve the goal, the common goal that we have of energy self-sufficiency. I am the principal of a small company called Indigenous Consultants. I worked on a model for developing renewable energy resources when I was at the UN many years ago. And my company, Indigenous Consultants, was involved in the last PUC docket here in Hawaii as advisors to the only Hawaiian company to ever come forward and bid for a renewable energy contract in the state of Hawaii. We developed and utilized a model that has 4 strategic planning steps in it and is based on a 4-pronged model for a strong, culturally appropriate foundation. This model calls for and requires the involvement of the indigenous resource owners when we move forward with a larger social solution. And that is why it's critical at the outset to understand that the Native people of all land bases, not just here in Hawaii, are truly the indigenous owners of these renewable resources. So strong partnerships are called for. What is the foundation that we need to follow? In my opinion, there are 4 prongs to it. Number 1 is the development of renewable energy culturally appropriate. Number 2, is it economically equitable? Number 3, is it socially responsible? And number 4, is it environmentally clean and sustainable for our Hawaii? When we look at the foundation, we realize at the outset that only one of our islands here in Hawaii has that renewable energy basis to carry us forward to achieve this goal, and that is Hawaii Island. But we are not here to achieve a goal for ourselves. We have to remember and include all of the smaller islands who do not have geothermal resources, as well as a civilian base of over 1 million people. So when we look at the foundation, culturally appropriate, economically equitable, socially responsible, and environmentally clean and sustainable, what is the strategic pathway then that will emerge so that we will achieve this goal for our state? To me, there's 4 steps, and it's a no-brainer. We start with the largest renewable energy resource we have, and that is geothermal. The second step is the development of a hydrogen economy. We have to look at that because we're a state with many different components that are all islands. And we cannot leave out the smaller islands, Molokai and Lanai. We either achieve energy renewability and sustainability with all islands, or we fail in the goal. When we look at this, we can see that there are 4 things we need to look at, because energy self-sufficiency is not going to feed our people, whether you're Hawaiian or not. So there's 2 sides of the renewable energy coin. One is renewable energy, and the other is food sustainability. These are the 2 weak points we have in Hawaii: to import on giant tankers fossil fuel to feed us and to power our economic engines. We have to get rid of that model and look at the strategic approach to renewable energy for Hawaii. And it begins with geothermal development. 1, not a proliferation, only on the Big Island. Firstly, the foundation, geothermal energy. Secondly, the development of the hydrogen component, because we must transport that energy inter-island. We will not leave the rest of our island family out. But I also have 2 other critical stopping points in this strategic pathway. They are the development of an ammonia industry, and finally, the development of the basalt rock minerals that we have also on the Big Island from previous lava flows. And why do I have this there? Geothermal, the largest renewable energy resource. Hydrogen, so that we can containerize it and share that benefit with the natives and the other civilian population on all the islands. Ammonia, because ammonia is the critical component for fertilizer. We are not going to achieve the goal by simply getting rid of our habits of relying on fossil fuel for cars. If we don't provide and go back to traditional times when we fed ourselves with 1 million people, we're going to continue to have to import fossil fuels. So ammonia becomes a critical component. It comes from geothermal, hydrogen. Ammonia is what we need for fertilizer. And let's remember that the Big Island has the largest amount of arable land. There is no other place where we can plant that food. And let's also remember that in the past, with Richard Haas' help, we saw how we could plant a lot of food for Hawaii and export right on the lava fields, because hothouse agriculture goes up beautifully on lava flow. You don't need soil to do hothouse agriculture to achieve the goal of food sustainability. And the last component to this strategic planning foundation is basalt rock. And I say this because the Big Island will power this with energy and food, and we cannot proceed without basalt stone coming from lava rock for our many, many bridges and to pave all of our roadways in the entire state. For years, we have been bringing in concrete that doesn't have the strength of basalt. But when we put basalt from geothermal into concrete, the bridges on the Big Island will stand for 300 years. We cannot afford to not do this. And the entire state needs that concrete, and they need that payment for their islands as well. So the way I see strategic approach to geothermal, we begin with the base load of firm power. People who are talking about intermittent energy, you know, I love solar panels. There's nothing wrong with them, solar and wind, but we're not gonna power Hawaii with solar when the sun goes down. We're not going to power Hawaii with wind when there is none. Intermittent energy that is renewable is not transported by cable. You lose too much. Firm power coming from geothermal will make that step, but we don't need to string cables between each island. That would have a terrible environmental impact on our fisheries, on our shoals, our reefs. That's not an alternative for us. With hydrogen, we can take that renewable energy and we can transport it to the neighbor islands without having to pay the huge cost of stringing our islands together with cables. We don't need it. I believe that we can do it with one from the Big Island to Oahu, and possibly with an expanding hydrogen market that is portable, possibly we might even be able to avoid that step. So if we approach the development of a sacred resource through the native development lens, we will achieve the goal. The last time around, Hawaiians said that Tutupele's energy was sacred and that it could only be developed in ways that were culturally appropriate, environmentally equitable, socially responsible. But we were not listened to, and that cost us 30 years of delay, Hawaiians being arrested and going to prison. That's the old way of doing business. We cannot afford to make those mistakes because the whole state is depending on us to bring Hawaii to a renewable point. We will be the model for other island nations and states to follow, and perhaps even for the continent. We will not achieve this goal unless we look at every renewable energy resource we have. Begin with geothermal, expand to hydrogen so we can share the benefit. Remember ammonia, because our dependency is not just related to the need we have to put fuel into machines. We have to grow our food and feed our people, or we will continue to be dependent upon tankers bringing in the food for our children. And finally, we need to do construction for renewable energy that's going to stand up for several generations. Why would we only use geothermal benefits for energy when we have vast quantities of basalt? You know, you folks, many new economic opportunities will arise here. Every black box in every airplane in the world, military and civilian, is made from basalt rock. So when we think about the opportunities for Hawaii, we can't just limit it to geothermal, hydrogen, ammonia, and basalt. We need to think about all the other products that people need, and we will be able to provide it. The geopolitical problems in the South China Sea, emerging now with North Korea, China, Russia. All of these things demonstrate our dependency on the fossil fuels of the old way. When we make these changes, we will not only strengthen our food security, but we will unplug ourselves from the filth of fossil fuel and bring about the dawning of a new era. And this time around, I feel very uplifted that we will not be on opposing sides. This time around, our goal is to have the native, indigenous, renewable energy advocate on the same team as everyone else. We've got some political problems in the legislature. I'm not worried about it because Hawaii's need for renewable energy and strong advocacy will give us the answers that we need. You know, as I come to the close of my 20-minute presentation, I just wanted one more time to mention the strategic pathway, geothermal, portable hydrogen, ammonia for food security, and base salt for strength. These products will help us achieve our goal for energy self-sufficiency for Hawaii, but it has to be culturally appropriate. It has to be economically equitable, socially responsible, and environmentally clean. We have the opportunity to show that Native people can work with those who are not. When you develop a sacred resource, and for us, it will bring us to the bar. We will be arrested if it is not culturally appropriate, but we should not have fear because we have the same goal, energy self-sufficiency that is clean for ourselves and our families. So this is one that I feel that we will form strong alliances on this issue. We have all the same investment to keep Hawaii clean and green and to make a better future for our children. I'm so looking forward to working with you all on this. It's so exciting to me. Aloha.
Aloha. Millilani, thank you so much. That was a powerful presentation. And thank you for bringing that to us all. We're going to try and squeeze, by the way, for those of you that have questions, and I'm sure that what Millilani presented just now certainly is gonna raise some questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try and pose them towards the end of the presentations. For now, we're going to try and get Eugene Tian on. He's got another appointment coming up, so he's going to come on and do the economic presentation from the state's perspective. Eugene is the state's economist out of DBED, and he's my favorite economist because he's kind of humorous and he can even help a retired military guy understand economics pretty well. So I got to hand it to him. He's got some talent. So Eugene, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to, sorry, I'm just going to present some numbers from the data we collected. So first, this table shows Hawaii primary energy consumption. So you can see that the total primary consumption is on the first column, and the renewable is on the second column. So the renewable is still pretty low in terms of total production. I think we are about 13.5% of the total. So if you look at the geothermal column, we do have a steady, it's pretty much level during those between 1995 to 2017. But 2018, because of the volcano eruption, we decreased and we pretty much closed in 2019. And recovery is actually happening in 2020 and 21. So this is, the data is coming from U.S. Energy Information Administration. We have the local report from utility companies. We have 2021 data. I'm going to show that later on. But in terms of the renewables, we look at the, this chart shows the 2019, the total energy use So you can see that the petroleum is still very high at 85.6%, coal at 4.6%, renewable is 9.7%. This is 2019 before the pandemic. And you can see the energy use is actually more than, it's almost 60% used for transportation. And industry is 7.1%, 4.6% goes to commercial. Residential is actually very low at about 2.8%. Even those energy, petroleum, basically used for generating electricity here, then those electricity feed back to industry, commercial, and residential. So you can see, even for the electricity, the residential consumption on electricity is the lowest among the industrial, commercial, and the residential sectors. Looking at the 2020, I think starting from 2022, we don't have coal anymore. For 2020 is during the pandemic, so we still have 80.7% petroleum. Coal is 5.7%, is actually a little increase in 2020. Renewable is 13.5%, is increase. So then going to transportation is still the majority, but it's less than 50%. So it's 46.9%. And you can see the energy goes to the residential, especially when the electricity goes to the residential. Now increase is because 2020 is a different working environment. A lot of people working from home, and they have less commuting, less traffic. So that's why transportation decreased, but people working from home, so they use more energy in the residential sector. So move on to the percentages of only talking about the renewable. So we are talking about how many percent. This is talking about only the electricity sector, because Hawaii's goal for by 2045, 100% use renewable is only applied to the electricity generation. So in terms of electricity generation, you look at the last column, the percent of renewable is 40% by 2021. I think this is ahead of our schedule. The state schedule is by 2030, we will reach 40%. So and then by 2045, we'll be 100%. So this is ahead of schedule. As a matter of fact, for Kauai is over 70%. For other island is lower, but overall for the state is 40%. So if you look at the categories, you look at which category has the most renewable is actually the solar. This is the custom site, is the rooftop. Solar. The solar here under the solar is actually the utility scale. Those ones are the majority, is the rooftop on the residential homes, and they have the majority of the renewables. In terms of percentage for the renewables, let me see if I go, if you look at the solar, last column is the rooftop, is about 42.6% out of 100%. So geothermal, this is statewide. You can see that geothermal was in 2005, it was about almost 31% of the total renewables. And on the Big Island, it was almost 30% of the electricity was generated by geothermal. So this has been declining in terms of the contribution, in terms of the share, is mainly because others like the solar, rooftop solar has been increasing, and utility scale solar has been increasing. But the geothermal, before the volcano, it has been very steady. And I'm happy to hear that Millilani was talking about the hydrogen. I think the hydrogen is a big thing currently in the state government. I think the governor in his state of state presentation, he actually claimed that hydrogen is one of his main goals for developing energy, because the Hawaii got into the second round of the selection by the US Department of Energy. So there are total $7 billion with 7 hydrogen centers. If Hawaii get it, we will be getting $1 billion, and that's a big milestone in terms of the renewable energy. You can see the one I'm showing here is only for electricity, but the majority of the energy consumption is actually not in the electricity, it's in the transportation. So we are looking at a bigger picture, not only for electricity, but a bigger picture, including transportation, that is hydrogen. I think that is itself is a big subject. Stan is expert in that area. So in terms of the geothermal, we have Big Island is the major, actually, currently is the only, the Puna geothermal venture is the only plant is producing this. This is the picture, and the description is from the US Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy website. So in terms of the use of geothermal, almost all of them are used for electricity generation. So the number here on the left, the second column shows the total production in terms of billions of BTUs. Majority of them, almost all of them, used for electricity generation. I think in the future, when we have this hydrogen hub, it has a big potential for, I heard that there are 6 ways to generate hydrogen, because hydrogen can be 7 days, 24 hours, 365 days, it can be transported. And also it will solve the energy issue in the transportation sector. And I think there may be some potential in Hawaii also from the geothermal to generate hydrogen. I think that is my last slide. So I will stop share, and if you leave the question at the end, or we could answer questions now.
Well, if anybody has a quick question for Eugene, we can check it out now. Eugene, thank you very much for your presentation and for your emphasis on hydrogen, being a hydrogen guy that I am. I appreciate it. But we did have one comment from Jose asking about, are we only looking at ammonia for agriculture? And Millilani, she's true to point out that that's a really important part, fertilizing crops, but ammonia is also being looked at as the replacement fuel for container ships, and potentially also, maybe Dan Gowin will get to it in his presentation, being used in gas turbines as a backup for geothermal power, in terms of you make hydrogen and ammonia out of, or maybe just hydrogen out of the geothermal electricity, and then you turn it back into your backup power using a regular gas turbine, similar to what Hawaiian Electric already uses with oil, not the same, but similar, to be able to burn in a gas turbine to produce electricity as a backup from the geothermal. So
Stan, you can burn that ammonia straight in that gas turbine.
Yeah, so
works wonderfully. Yeah.
So yes, ammonia is used for a lot of good things, including possibly aviation, because guess what airplanes run on? They run on gas turbines. So that starts to make it a military applicable consideration and everything else. So hydrogen's a real critical important consideration, because one of the biggest costs to making clean hydrogen is the cost of electricity. And if we can get the cost of electricity to a reasonable rate, not only for the population for their electric use, but to make hydrogen, you can drive the cost of a hydrogen down, which then can also be used in transportation. So it's a good solution all the way around, and I appreciate the focus on it. So if you have any other questions for Eugene, he's got to pop off for another meeting, but maybe he can join us later on if we have questions for him. In the meantime, our next presenter is Mike Kaleikini. And when it comes to geothermal in the state of Hawaii, there's probably nobody else that has the hands-on experience that he does. He's been around since day one on Puna Geothermal Ventures. And we've asked Mike to kind of talk about lessons learned in standing up geothermal. Being the first is always the hardest. So he's definitely had the biggest challenge. And then maybe to look in his crystal ball about geothermal in the future and things that he sees as an advantage. So Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you, Stan. Yeah, and thank you everyone for participating. Happy New Year, everybody. And yeah, so I wanted to start off by just an overview of the history of commercial geothermal. You know, it really started in the mid 80s with the Hawaii Geothermal project, the HGPA project that the state embarked on. It was a 3 megawatt pilot project to prove the viability of geothermal. And this was on the East Rift, adjacent to the current location that the Puna Geothermal facility is situated at today. So it was in 1993 that PGB commenced commercial operation. And just FYI, this year is the 30th anniversary of commercial operation, with the exception of the time that we spent shut down because of the eruption in 2018. But we started off as a 25 megawatt project in 1993. Back then, there was challenges associated with the development of geothermal. You know, in parallel, the state was actually, the state embarked on a project to develop as much as 200 or so megawatts uprift of us on the East Rift, but above us. And the intent and the idea was to have undersea cables and transport this power from the Big Island to Maui and then ultimately to Oahu. So that project did get a lot of pushback. I think Millilani may have mentioned briefly, you know, about the early days, not in great detail. However, there was a lot of lessons learned in that one. You know, what happened back then is probably similar to what's been going on recently with those of you who are familiar with up at Mauna Kea, with astronomy. So that was, and Millie did mention about people getting arrested back then, but I think we've come a long way, thanks to, you know, folks, developers like Millilani and their groups and the experience they bring from other places like New Zealand. I think the acceptance on geothermal on the cultural side has improved very much so. We see a lot of interest from folks that, you know, are from the Hawaiian community. Part of that is that there's been legislative action that's been taken. Last year, the ledge appropriated some monies to allow some due diligence to try and prove up if there's resource on Hawaiian homelands. That's a big plus, yeah. So, but getting back to the history, in 1993, we came online as 25 megawatt facility. In 1995, we increased to 30 megawatts. And then it wasn't until 2012 that PGB increased another 8, and which is today's current contract with Hawaiian Electric. We're at 38 megawatts. So yeah, we shut down in 2018 because of the eruption. We came back online in November of 2020. And today we're at about 23 megawatts and still focused on getting back to 38 megawatts. So PGB is a parent company is Ormat. We have our corporate office in Reno, Nevada. And we fully support all the initiatives that are in front of us. You know, Hawaii getting to 100% renewable at 2045, the discussions with hydrogen, ammonia, we're fully supportive. You know, our focus is about developing and delivering geothermal energy. That's our key focus. And so what we're focused on today is getting back to 38 megawatts. You know, we have permits that allow us to increase up to 60 megawatts. And recently, we've been in negotiation with Hawaiian Electric for a repower project. And so that was conditionally approved by the Public Utilities Commission last year in March. And part of that is a requirement for us to perform an environmental assessment. And so we've embarked on performing an EIS. We've decided to do that on our own. The county will be the accepting authority. And we hope to have that completed probably early to middle of the second quarter of this year. And based on the PUC's orders, once that is completed, we will then be able to start construction. So what the repower project consists of is installing 3 more modern generating units and decommissioning the 12 smaller units that we have. But because it's more efficient, we will utilize the same geothermal resource for 38 megawatts today, but it would result in a 46 megawatt project here. So if you go back to 1993, we had the state-of-the-art equipment at that time, but now today in 2023, we're looking at much more improved efficiencies on the equipment that we have. You know, and the equipment that we had initially was designed primarily to utilize the steam fraction, because the geothermal resource is mostly steam and water. We refer to it as brine. And initially the resource was about 90% steam and 10% brine, but that has transitioned to what it is today, which is 30% steam and 70% brine. So the new equipment doesn't really care what the ratios are. It just cares about the amount of heat content. And so that's what makes it more efficient in the design. So we're looking forward to that. We're hoping that the new equipment will be online before the end of 2025. That's our focus, yeah. That's our goal anyway. Again, the focus is still getting back to 38 megawatts. With regards to geothermal on the other islands, I know that the University of Hawaii, the Groundwater and Geothermal Resource Center, has done some work throughout the state. We, PGV and ORMAT, did some preliminary work on Maui, on Haleakala, and we didn't get far on that. So we ended up focusing more back here on Hawaii Island and elsewhere in the mainland. But from my discussions with the Groundwater and Geothermal Resource Center, there is potential on the other islands. And yes, Stanley and I talked, I mean, it's a matter of just how deep you can drill, potentially, I mean, not potentially, there will be heat ultimately. So here at PGV, we drill, the deepest we've drilled here is a little over 8,000 feet. But our rigs have the ability to go as deep as 10,000 feet. It's just a matter, the requirement is really what the rig's capability for pulling power of the casing and the piping, etc., will determine what depth that rig can go down to. Now, there are rigs that, in oil and gas that go 20,000 feet, but our company doesn't have that because we are not drilling that deep for geothermal resources. So, it's true that in order for us to get to 100% renewable energy just on the electricity side, we need technologies that can perform what the oil plants are doing today, which is following the load. As the load increases, they automatically generate more power. Nighttime, when the load decreases, they automatically back off. So when there are cycles like that, we need the technology that can do that. And right now, energy storage and other renewable resources can do it for a brief period of time, but we want it 24/7. And that's the advantage that geothermal has. So we're really looking forward to the future. We like all renewable sources, but we love geothermal. And I'll be here if there's any questions come up.
Okay, Mike, thanks for the presentation. And we did have a couple questions pop up. One was, from Howard Wig was what was the efficiency when you first started in 93 compared to what you predict as the efficiency now?
So it's not, so initially, the way we determine efficiency is the amount of steam that was utilized. So we use about 20,000 pounds per hour per megawatt initially. And that was just the steam side, yeah. So today, because it's a combined steam and brine, we're probably on the order of 15,000 pounds per hour. But we are a saturated system, so whatever pressures and temperatures is associated on the steam fraction, it'll be the same on the brine side also.
So another question would be, there's binary systems and then there's direct steam system.
Yes.
What does PGV use?
So today we use a combination of steam and binary. We direct steam turbines, back pressure turbines, and coupled with organic Rankine cycle, which we use a working fluid, it's pentane, low boiling point, and like on the steam cycle, the exhaust steam from the turbines still contains enough heat that we can go through heat exchangers, vaporize the pentane performs some work, and then cool off the pentane and back to liquid. So that's the organic Rankine cycle, ORC. Now, the repower project that I mentioned is going to be all ORC. So it's all going to be organic. I mean, it's just not going to look at whatever the resource is. It's just going to look at the heat content and go through heat exchangers to transfer the heat to the working fluid, and it'll be pentane or hydrocarbon fluid as the working fluid.
So for everybody, then when they hear pentane and intermediate fluids, they get kind of nervous about polluting water and things like that. But these are totally separate cycles, correct?
Correct. The pentane cycle is a closed loop cycle in itself. It starts off as the liquid transfer. You get the heat from the geothermal resource, and the pentane vaporizes. It performs work, generates electricity, and then it goes through cooling fans, cools it back to a liquid, and starts all over again. So the only losses you get is like fugitive or for maintenance, like seals and that sort of thing, which is something that's regulated by the Department of Health. And we got to report the consumption, use, and on a regular basis.
So everybody understands. Then the heat source, the steam or the brine, that's coming out of the ground, never commingles with this working fluid. There are two separate systems, and it's only the heat that's exchanged through heat exchangers that give you the working fluid, the heat that it needs to transform from steam back to liquid, back to steam, back to liquid.
Right, back to vapor. Yes.
Yeah. Great.
Yep.
All right, Mike. Thanks. We'll be looking for any more questions on the chat. And up next is Richard Ha, one of my favorite Big Island banana farmer. And he's famous from my side for introducing me to hydroelectric possibilities on the Big Island, because on his farm, he actually put in a hydroelectric plant. And I got to see it probably 10 years ago when it was first put in. And it was on a tour that he gave a bunch of us. And it's pretty amazing. And when you think about Hawaii's history in agriculture with sugar and pineapple, there's an awful lot of water flowing from our mountains to the sea and not getting used for anything. And if we could take some of these flumes, old sugar flumes, and maybe some of the old irrigation water and run it through turbines before it runs into the sea or gets used by agriculture, hey, that would be a great way to also generate electricity. But Richard's going to talk to us about some things he's been working on lately and talking a little bit about geothermal from, again, sort of like from Millilani's perspective, from the cultural and Hawaiian community's perspective. So Richard, all yours. You're on mute, Richard.
How's it, everybody? Three things. Hawaii is the most fossil fuel dependent state in the union, number one. Number two, Hawaii has the highest electricity rate in the nation. And number three, Hawaii is the most vulnerable state because we are located in the middle of the largest ocean in the world. PUC docket amended and restated power purchase agreement, the ARPPA 2019-0333 gives us some direction. I am the great-great-great-grandson of Kamahele Nui. He signed the Ku'e petition protesting the annexation of Hawaii. I was influenced a lot by our family land down the beach at Maku. I was 10 years old when Pop told us kids stories that influenced my whole life. I realized much later that it came down through generations. So, just recently, our website, the rubberslippergroup.com, spelled DARUBBAHSLIPPAH group, went live recently. If you go to that website, click on the book, What Would Our Kupuna Do? That'll take you to a free shareable audio copy of the book. The Rubber Slipper Group focuses on the future. It asks, what can we do for Kyoki and Mandia, who are toddlers today, when they reach 25 years old, which is one generation from now? We must do the right thing. We are their ancestors. I was the only person from Hawaii to have attended 5 Association for the Study of Peak Oil ASPO conferences starting in 2007. 2 of the most important concepts I learned was, 1, it takes energy to get energy. The net energy left over is what society gets to use. In the 1930s, it took the energy of 1 barrel of oil to get 100 barrels. There is a direct relationship between total world fossil fuel supply to GDP. It's great as long as fossil fuel is cheap and affordable. But that relationship will also hold when we start down the backside of the world's oil supply curve. The shale revolution started 10 years after oil prices hit $147 a barrel in 2008. It caused the fossil fuel prices to drop. 10 years later, it hit its peak and is now on the way down. Hawaii is very lucky to have geothermal. Only 1% of the world is so lucky. Hawaii will sit over the hotspot for 1 to 2 million years. That's practically forever. The heat and steam is free. It's like a giant battery that never needs charging. The ARPPA docket 2019-0333 anticipates that PGV will produce 46 megawatts at full production. HELCO guarantees purchase of 20 megawatts at around 6 cents a kilowatt hour, and the ratepayers will pay another 5 cents for 26 megawatts of curtailed standby power in case of emergency. The opportunity lies in utilizing the 26 megawatt of standby power that is now wasted when it's not used. Enabling a special hydrogen rate of 10 cents a kilowatt hour will leave a margin of 4 cents per kilowatt hour for HELCO to make money they would not otherwise make from heavy trucks, air, and maritime transportation. It could enable a 5-station hydrogen refueling network and immediately position Hawaii as leaders in the upcoming hydrogen economy and move us toward ammonia. It could encourage others in the world to do test projects on Hawaii Island. Instead of gray, brown, polka dot colored hydrogen, Hawaii Island can lead the nation in moving toward a green hydrogen economy. We can make stable price green electricity from geothermal. We can make green hydrogen by running green electricity through water. Heat of hydrogen can take us to green ammonia. NH3 green ammonia is a better to hydrogen. NH3 is a fuel that can run legacy fossil fuel plants, and green ammonia is a nitrogen fertilizer. The concept is pretty much both hits the ground. The rest of it is heat, and that's why the grass is green where the ammonia hits the ground from light. What would our kupuna do? They valued physical science. What will future generations think of us with the knowledge we have? We are their ancestors. Thanks, that's it.
Thanks, Richard. We appreciate it, and we really treasure the fact that you bring this approach from taking care of our future generations, and the agricultural piece that, I mean, not too many farmers left out in the world nowadays. Everybody wants to have a job where they can sit at their computer, and being a farmer is tough work. So we know that what you've gained from your experience and talking and taking part in the oil forums on the mainland, and also looking back at your growing up on the Big Island and listening to the kupuna talk to you about how things should be and what you should be doing. We appreciate you sharing that with us, and we appreciate your support as we move forward. We didn't have any questions specifically for Richard, so we'll move on to Dan Gowin is our next presenter, coming to us from the mighty megalopolis of Indianapolis, Indiana, or thereabouts in the suburbs. And Dan and I started talking about energy probably 2 years ago. I bugged the daylights out of him because I kept getting information from him, and I kept inviting him on my Think Tech show, and he'd say he's too busy. And finally, I got him on the show, and since then, I haven't been able to keep him off of these forums. And that's a good thing, because he brings a really broad experience in the oil and gas industry, but not just to make oil and gas. He's also got a background in the military, so he understands the national security pieces. He understands the economic pieces because he follows the world's economic markets on commodities and energy. So he's got a great perspective, and his family also has some experience in geothermal. So Dan, fill us full of knowledge from your perspective, and tell us, probably the most important thing that I'd want to see from you is, could we do deep geothermal here? Because we are islands that are basalt based, we are, like you heard Millilani talk about, we're not like little atolls that are just coral islands that grow up in the middle of the water. We're actually big mountains built off the seabed that are basaltic. And could that translate to good geothermal? And that being important because you can do that geothermal any place. You don't need to be on a specific hotspot. One question that I'll pose to you before you get started, you can answer in presentation, is people are concerned that if we try and do geothermal here near the shoreline, the ocean will actually cool the heat coming up that you're trying to extract before you can actually get any use out of it. So why don't you address that in your presentation?
Sure. I'm gonna go ahead and share out my screen. I've got a PowerPoint, and I'll go ahead and go through it. Okay. I hope everybody can see my screen. I'm gonna go ahead and click on.
Yeah, we got it.
There we go. Okay. So I'm Dan Gowin. I think you've seen some of the shows Dan and I've done. My mixture is I'm a child of a lot of laboratories, and some people have actually commented that I'm probably a product of one of those labs, but I digress. So my background is a lot of military. I live here in Indianapolis, which is sort of a mixture of government contracting, public utilities. I got drug out of the Navy's labs into the public utility business, building the ISOs. So I built there's a place called Mid-Continent ISO. So I designed the computer system that controls the power grid for 26 states and parts of Canada. So that was one heck of a project. But since then, Lily and have wandered off in the corporate land, but a lot of my customers these days are public utilities. And especially when you're talking about natural gas and electric companies, and we use a lot of natural gas in burning and gas turbines. So that means I have to get knee deep into the oil and gas business to see what they're doing. So that way, not only am I measuring the data coming through the pipeline systems across the United States, but I pull real-time data out of the wells. I go down and talk to the drillers, so I have a good idea what they're doing and understand. I merge all that together with software, which means I merge it into the financial markets. So that's how I understand a lot of the things that I'm doing. And as far as, and some people were talking about bringing up all this geothermal and getting up to the power plant that's going to lose all the heat. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're kind of blessed in that respect because solid rock is one of the best insulators around. So if you're bringing up a deep geothermal through those pipes and you're bringing it up through solid rock, no, you're not going to, your heat losses are going to be really small. I mean, less than 1%. So you'd be amazed how efficient solid rock is a thermal insulator. Okay, so latest in geothermal power plants. So this is a picture of the Rat River power plant. It was commissioned in 1980. My dad, a lot of my family's nuclear Navy. My dad got out of the Navy, went to work at a place called the INL, and one of the first projects he did at the Idaho National Engineering Lab, working for the Department of Energy, was this power plant. So this was commissioned in 1980. It was a binary geothermal power plant, and it was a power plant. And if you're a Navy guy and you've been inside of a submarine, you look at this and say, man, Dan, that looks like a lot of submarine. Yeah, that's because submarine guys built this, okay? The novel idea was using an intermediate fluid to drive the turbine, and we're going to step through, and I'm going to explain why they chose isopentane or pentane to drive a turbine, a steam turbine. And we're going to go through all those things. And then I'm going to step into the deep geothermal and what we're doing today in the oil and gas business. And I'm going to talk about how you can talk to what Michael was talking about those oil and gas business, how deep these guys are able to drill. And they're able to drill a lot deeper than what most people know. Okay. So we can go click on the next one here. So why use a binary system with intermediate organic fluid? Well, first of all, the first part about, especially when you're talking about deep geothermal, is you want to have your wells, if you're injecting water down into the ground, into a thermal reservoir, and you're bringing the water back up. The first thing you want to do is you want to keep it pressurized. And the reason why you pressurize it is to keep all those geological structures in place. And we'll talk about this later on in the presentation. The next thing is you want to use, it goes through a heat exchanger, and that's that vapor generator thing you see right here. And the reason why is you're going to bring this liquid called pentane or isopentane to a boil. And understand this is a fluid that has a low boiling temperature. But more important, it has what we call a low supercritical temperature. And I'll show you why that's important and when it comes to driving turbines. A steam turbine, or a gas turbine, any kind of turbine, those devices run on pressure. The higher the pressures, the more power you can get rotating out of that turbine to drive a generator. And like what Michael was saying is we take that isopentane, we bring it to a boil, you run it through the turbine, we condense it back into a liquid, right? And we just keep cycling it over and over and over again. These binary geothermal power plants, not only do we keep cycling the pentane through the power plant, but we also do that with that deep geothermal hot water, that brine. And the reason why, there's usually a lot of things dissolved in that water. You don't want it contaminating your groundwater. So you bring that hot water up and you run it through your heat exchanger, then you pump it directly back down in the ground. And these geothermal reservoirs are deep underground, so that way they don't interact with your groundwater. That way you're just recirculating the water over and over again through that deep geothermal reservoir. And some of the depths we're talking about, some of these depths are deeper than the Hawaiian Islands are tall above the ocean floor. Okay, some of the depths we're talking about. Okay. One of the first reasons why you use pentane in these power plants has to do with the turbine. Water's corrosive. And the reason why is basically there's oxygen dissolved in that water. Now these turbines, these steam turbines, are made out of stainless steel, but even after 10 years, they start rusting. So about every 10 years, these guys have to tear these things apart. They pull the rotor out and they sandblast them clean, put her back together, pressurize her, and put her back in service. But the other thing you have to realize is that in power plants, we add a lot of things to the water to try to remove the oxygen from it. And some of these things are pretty toxic. So I know there's concerns about people talking about things like pentane and so forth. Well, first of all, most of us here, if you own a car, you've actually been exposed to pentane. Pentane is one of the things they blend into gasoline. So the toxicity of pentane is actually one of the lowest toxic elements of gasoline. So, but when it's compared to the things we add to boiler water, some of that's more toxic than the pentane. So do I deal with the boiler and all the chemicals we boiler water, right, to eliminate the oxygen out of the system so it doesn't corrode my very expensive turbine? Or is it better just to deal with pentane? If you were using this system with pentane coming in contact with this turbine, it would actually last a lot longer because pentane is a hydrocarbon. It actually protects the metal. Okay, so your most expensive part of your power plant will last longer by not being exposed to the steam, is what I'm trying to tell you. The second reason has to do with this, and it goes back to this, what we call supercritical steam, this chart right here. The power plants, these steam turbines, they run on supercritical steam. And if you notice there, it says there that water goes supercritical at 374 degrees Celsius or 705 degrees Fahrenheit. That's actually pretty hot. Besides, when it comes to geothermal, if you're going to get 705 degrees Fahrenheit, you're talking about drilling to like 48,000 feet to get water that hot to drive your turbine. The other aspect is when you run equipment this hot, it tends to have a lot of wear and tear on it. So if you can run your power plant at lower temperatures, it's easier to cool it, less wear and tear on the equipment, less wear and tear on bearings. It's just better for the equipment if I don't have to run it as hot as that. Okay. So pentane. So this here is a chart for pentane. If you notice a supercritical point here for pentane, a second here. Supercritical point for pentane is about 196.5 degrees Celsius, which happens to be 386 degrees Fahrenheit. So that means that you only need to drill your geothermal wells deep enough to get at water. That's 386 degrees Fahrenheit to get your pentane to go critical. Now, when pentane is up at 227 degrees Celsius, which is 440 degrees Fahrenheit, that pentane, that'll use supercritical pentane at 100 bar, which equates to 1,450 PSI. You can run really great turbines like the one behind me on 1,450 PSI worth of pressure. And the other, so like I said, so the pentane protects the turbine, but the pentane also means that that turbine can run on lower temperature water, right? Because the pentane has a much lower boiling temperature than water does. So there's two good reasons for not having water or steam having a direct contact with your turbine. Okay. Then we go into the deep geothermal. Now, the oil and gas business, especially out in the Gulf of Mexico, those guys routinely drill down to 35,000 feet. A lot of the horizontal drilling technology was really started because of those deep sea drilling rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico, because you can imagine they've got this small floating platform out in the ocean that costs billions of dollars, but they've got to somehow maximize how they can get at this oil reservoir deep underground. So that led to directional drilling, which is what they've been using for the last 30 years. So this graphic here shows where they can drill straight down from what they call a drill pad. Essentially 1 acre or less, they can have multiple wells drilled from the same pad. They can drill vertically down 30,000 feet, and then they only need about 500 feet to turn the direction of the drilling, essentially 180 degrees if they have to. But they can start drilling horizontally. They can drill all the way out to 2 kilometers. Now, the reason why this is important, if you see down here, my graphic, I've got here where you've got essentially three horizontals on one side, 3 on the other side. Essentially, the center horizontal, that's what we call production. That's where the water's coming up. The 2 on the end, that's where you're actually injecting water. So you inject water into a reservoir and then bring it back up the surface. The other reason why you want to do this is to increase the size of your thermal reservoir. One of the issues I know they're dealing with geothermal power in the business is that most of your wells are just vertical wells and you're horizontally drilling and fracturing the rock. The other is that from the data I've seen from the Department of Energy, I think they're recommending that your thermal reservoir is only about 55,000 gallons. The issue with doing that is, let's say, for example, you have a 50 megawatt thermal reservoir. After about 30 years, the energy content drops down about 30 megawatts sustained power. You get what's called thermal depletion. The reason why that's happening is because the reservoir is too large. So what I'm saying here is to avoid the whole thermal depletion issue, you need much larger thermal reservoirs, probably in the order of 550,000 gallons of water. It could be seawater. It doesn't have to be potable water. But that's what this graphic displays. Now, right there, I've got 30,000 feet is 9,144 meters underground. That'll get you down at that 440-degree Fahrenheit zone that we were talking about for the turbine. To be safe, it'd probably be closer, probably 33,000. But again, this is a normal operating depth that they're already doing with the deep sea drilling rigs that are out in the Gulf of Mexico today. So we're not doing anything they're not already doing, is what I'm saying. When it comes to drilling through things like basalt and granite, those are usually pretty hard, brittle types of rock. With the oil and gas business, what they use to drill through that rock is something what they call radio jet drilling. What you see is this drill head right here. Essentially what they do is they use high frequency. Apparently these granite and basalt rocks, they're very hard, but they're also very brittle. And so they use basically high frequencies to break up the rock, and then the water jets basically blast the rock out. The easiest way I can describe this is essentially it's sort of like there's a device called a rock drill. You've seen a jackhammer break up concrete. They use rock drills for basically drilling through hard rock so they can drill out holes in the rocks and they pack it full of dynamite. They also, if you go in on a Lowe's, you can buy a drill it's called a hammer drill, a rock drill, a hammer drill, and it's used for drilling for concrete. It works on the same concept where they basically use high frequency vibrations to break it up. You know, in a jackhammer, essentially, you've got a hammer that's basically hitting up against the back end of your drill bit back and forth at high speeds, and that's what's breaking up the rock. At the same time, it's turning or spinning, or in this case, they're using high pressure water to blast out the rock chips out from the rock face. So this is how they're doing deep drilling in like granite and basalt. I know from people, I think there's a company called iPulse that are forecasting that their technology will be available within 5 years. I kind of laughed at it and scratched my head. I'm like, okay, well, but some of the drillers I know, they're already using this tech anyway. So it's been around for maybe the last 20 years. It's not new. Okay, electron power technology. This is one of the models I've been running lately, and this is simply just a Hitachi steam turbine. It's 110 megawatt steam turbine with generator. Over on the left-hand side there, you see that is a standard tube and sheet heat exchanger. And all I'm doing is just running simulations where we're basically running hot brine water through the heat exchanger and basically changing the model for different loads. So for example, based on that type of energy source, we're just using 18-inch drill pipe, water going up, water going back down, probably about 55,000 gallons per hour, something like that. I'm able to maintain a load between 20 megawatts all the way up to 110 megawatts. And of course, it's dialable on an hourly basis. So depending what the power grid there in Hawaii needs, this is nice, sustainable, reliable base load. Okay. And if you do the deep geothermal as what I've described below, you could build one of these power plants pretty much on any island that you have. To understand that around there in the Hawaiian Islands, like I said, you've got a mountain. From the sea floor to the surface of the ocean is about 10,000 feet, and then there's another 20,000 feet of sedimentary rock around your island. So only right underneath the island is their basalt. But if you go below that, there's a sedimentary basin of sedimentary rock, which is usually limestone, and down below, which is usually from 10 to 20,000 feet down, from 20,000 feet down to 30,000 or beyond that, it's just all basalt. But but those layers between the sedimentary rock and your basalt, that's a great opportunity for building. For example, one of the things I told Stan is building a giant hydrogen repository, because one of the things I can do is I can saturate the rock with salt water and make it impervious to hydrogen, and we could build a massive hydrogen repository for Hawaii, probably about 20,000 feet down. That's, like I said, from the surface of the ocean to from sea level down to the sea floor, and then another 10,000 feet below that. So it'd be 20,000 feet down, and then horizontally drill out at least 2 miles. I've seen some laterals that go all out as far as 8 miles. So, but that's all possible with what the drillers are currently doing right now. Okay. So that's all what's doable. This is just a chart from the USGS, and here they're only forecasting that the United States should be able to generate at least 10 terawatts of energy from geothermal. Since the United States has, I think it's 4,400 terawatts worth of total generating capacity, I think this number is really low, considering you should be able to build a geothermal power plant about any place. The only places I think are going to be limited are some of the seismic areas. I think some places in Japan might be sensitive, but I firmly believe that over on the Japan Sea side of Japan, we should be able to do a lot of geothermal power plants on that side of Japan, and stay away from the eastern side of Japan because of that Pacific Plate subduction zone over on that on the east coast of Japan. But I think most places you'll be able to build one of these geothermal power plants. And by using larger geothermal reservoirs, get away from the whole heat depletion issues that have plagued the geothermal energy business so far, just by using larger reservoirs. And the reason why, and using those larger reservoirs just has to do with the fact that water uptakes heat for so long, and you can deplete a heat source, but you can get around it by using a much larger reservoir, by using a lot more fractured rock, by increasing the amount of water to rock contact surface area, and that's how you get around it. Question. So this is just a picture of one of these 110 megawatt Hitachi steam turbines with its generator. That's
All right,
what
Dan.
Yep.
Thanks very much. And this is why I brought you on, because you have experience in industrial areas that we don't have resident in Hawaii for the most part. And it's important. There weren't any questions in the chat other than, and I think you covered it on the critical fluid going from steam back to liquid and such. So I think you answered that question. If not, whoever put it up in the chat can rephrase it. But I had a couple questions for you. First of all, on the deep drill bits, you talked about when you get down below, like especially 30,000 feet, the basalt actually starts to become more pliable or more plastic, and that creates problem. That takes away that brittleness where that drill bit you showed would normally take advantage of the brittle nature to break up the rock. But when it gets more plastic, I understand that they're actually using like electro and other types of bits that go through that. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah, the iPulse guys, what essentially they're doing, Stan, and they're not going into detail, but they're using some of the ultra capacitors that we developed originally for the Navy's railgun project. The circuit they're using is something called a tank circuit. Tank circuits are used in the big AM radio transmitting stations. What it is, it's an oscillator. So what they're doing is instead of building all your high frequency equipment on the surface and somehow piping that high frequency AC down to your drill head through a big long cable, well, can we put more of that equipment down in the borehole right next to where we're drilling? So that's why they're thinking about using that ultra capacitor, that high frequency circuit, and basically taking it. And right now they've got a pretty complex piece of equipment, that directional drilling head that we're using. What they're going to do is they're going to modify that directional drilling head. So they got a specialty drilling head that uses that high frequency circuit to drive that same drill bit that I showed you. So that's really what they're working on. As far as breaking through, when you were talking about the, the Earth's crust, the planet Earth is like an egg. I mean, you got this hard shell and it gets soft and gooey in the middle. Well, that eggshell is about 10,000 feet deep. So if you got wells that are only 10,000 feet deep and you're hydraulically fracturing rock and it's creating earthquakes and stuff like that, well, that's because you're drilling a rock that's really brittle. Once you go past 10,000 feet, right, the rock becomes plastic. In fact, it's kind of interesting because what happens is as you drill deeper, not only does it get hotter, but the rock becomes less dense. It becomes a lot more porous. There's a lot more water. And interesting enough, there's actually a lot more hydrogen in the rock. So that's kind of a mystery here. So it's actually, so once you get down past really hard brittle rock, that first 10,000 feet, it becomes a lot easier to drill, right? As far as the guys doing the Jeep geothermal, they keep going back to the whole thing I was showing you about supercritical steam, running a steam turbine that they need 700 degree. Well, they're talking about drilling depths like 48,000 feet. Well, we've never been able to drill deeper than 40,000 feet. In fact, there are 16 wells in the world drilled down to 40,000 feet. Most of them are in Russia, but there's at least 3 of them that are here in Oklahoma, here in the United States, where we've drilled wells down to that 39, 40,000 feet depth. So the data is pretty consistent. So I hope that answers the question.
That does. And another question that's always asked when you talk about especially fracking as it's used in the natural gas and oil business is how about seismic events when you do deep drilling? Does that plastic earth mean you get less seismic issues?
Yeah, less seismic. Yeah. Those seismic events occurring is because you're drilling less than 10,000 feet and you're really in hard brittle rock. When you take something like glass that it breaks, you get a seismic event. But if you're going deeper than that, that rock's full of plastic. In fact, that plastic rock, one of the things you have to do is you have to case the well. And I think, Stan, I sent you a thing on when they case the well and they pump concrete and the concrete's between the casing and the rock wall. You have to do that to maintain the integrity of the well, because otherwise the rock is so plastic, it'll fill in your well. It'll close the hole if you don't keep it.
And for the audience, that presentation he's talking about, I was trying to figure out how the heck they would get concrete to make a nice clean cylinder with the technology is amazing, but it can be done. And it's pretty impressive. Another question would be, we talk about, especially with Millilani and Richard talking about agriculture, when you start putting solar arrays out on the surface of the landmass to collect energy, you take up an awful lot of space. How much space are we really talking about taking up with geothermal power plants?
Well, the power plant, the graphic I showed you, we're talking about a power plant that's going to sit on top of 1 acre, meaning I can have 6 wells pumping probably 200 megawatts worth of, probably 250, 300 megawatts worth of thermal energy, and I put the geothermal power plant on top of it, probably a 200 megawatt power plant that's sitting on 1 acre. And we might be able to build bigger ones than that, but give me time. I need to figure out some more engineering. But right now, I'm willing to commit to at least 100 to 200 megawatt power plants on, like I said, less than 1 acre. I know that coal-fired power plant that AES has there in Hawaii, stands that thing sitting in like 40 acres.
I think that was about how much it was.
Yeah. So I look at that and say, well, maybe we only need about 2 acres, and we probably sell off the other 38.
Yeah. So anyway, Hawaiian Electric put out an RFP for energy production, renewable energy production. I sent the RFP to Dan and said, hey, do any of your friends want to try and turn the old AES coal-fired power plant into a geothermal power plant? Because it is in Campbell Industrial Park, which is near the shoreline. But as we were saying, and that's why the question of how deep do you go? Can you really still do geothermal in Hawaii when you're 10, 15 miles away from the shoreline? And I think the answer is yes, you can do it. There's probably some challenges there, but you should be able to do it. My last question for you, Dan, is return on investment. When you look at nuclear power plants and you look at geothermal power plants and you look at the big rigs that you just used as a example there in the Gulf of Mexico, that's many hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. So when it comes to return on investment, where do you see geothermal power plants in relation to nuclear or any other kind of solar and things like that?
Well, when you're talking about nuclear power, you're talking the energy return, we call it EROI, right? Is probably the best one. And we're talking about, for example, the equivalent of a barrel of oil, and we can figure out what the price of a barrel of oil is. But when you're looking at these, you have to say, okay, how much energy am I investing in this energy source, and what will I get out of it? So probably the top daddy on there is usually it's going to be nuclear power, and that's going to be 75-1, meaning every barrel oil of energy I invest in this, I'm going to get 75 equivalent barrels of energy out of it. The deep geothermal that I'm talking about, you're talking 30-1. So it's not as good as the nuclear as far as return on investment, but 30-1 is quite impressive. And especially if we've got some decent energy storage where we're basically taking massive quantities of hydrogen and continuously storing. I mean, when you're producing power out on the power grid, you know, the public doesn't use all the power all the time. There's sometimes when they only need about 20 megawatts, but other times of the year they may need 100 megawatts worth of power. But if you have your power plant consistently running at, say, 100 megawatts worth of power, right, you can take the extra energy and squirrel it away in storage, store it as hydrogen in a hydrogen gas repository, right? If you're talking about doing it that way, then your EROI ends up in the hundreds, right? Because you're efficiently storing all that extra energy.
Yeah, you're using all the energy to make stored energy that you can sell.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
All right. Well, Dan, thank you very much. And I think we caught most of the questions. There were some questions about what's the potential for doing geothermal on other islands besides a big island. And I think we answered the question that potentially there's
any one of the islands,
doing it on any of the islands, as long as they're over basically a good basalt bed. Finally got another question from Ella that says, in the event of a disaster like a hurricane, does geothermal plant continue to operate? And I'd say, you know, as long as it's not in an inundation zone, like from a tsunami, you probably are going to be able to operate, because most of the equipment is surface or below ground and kind of isolated. But if you had a big inundation, particularly from like salt water from a tsunami or something, you'd probably want to build the plants away from the inundation zones. Is that a good estimate, Mike or Dan?
Yeah, I mean, you could build, you know, depending on what you're willing to invest in your generating power plant. You know, if your power plant is basically a shed over the top of your turbine, that might be a problem. But if you're willing to spend the money to harden your power plant with some concrete, the only real risk you got is going to be just your power grid, your transformers and telephone poles, and that's usually the stuff that goes down. Michael, you might be able to answer this better than I, because you run one of the public utilities there in Hawaii about that. But I know here, our biggest risk here in Indiana is when we get a tornado come through and take out a bunch of high tension power line. That's the power plants are rarely ever affected by any of it.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, Dan. In 2014, Hurricane Iselle made landfall right here in the Puna district. And the plant was fine. What was happened is the transmission lines got taken out with all the trees and whatnot. Yep. And so we couldn't deliver the energy without the transmission lines. So as soon as we got that back, we started the plant back up.
All right. Well, I want to thank all our presenters today for their hard work. Nicole Lautzu from the university is going to be with us on a future presentation. She ended up having a travel conflict on this one, but she's definitely, we wanted her in this forum. If we could get her, we'll put her into a second geothermal forum next month and get her comments at that point. But she's been working hard and she's aware. I send her things from Dan, and I know she talks to Mike, and Hawaii's looking really positive on geothermal, and I'm excited about the future. So thanks again to everybody for participating and presenting. And I'm going to turn it back over to Michael Markrich for some final comments. You're on mute, Mike. If nothing else, I'm good at telling people they're on mute. Uh-oh, looks like he's stuck on mute. Maybe the IT guys can take him off mute for him. I don't know. Uh-oh. Looks like he's on terminal mute.
Oh,
I got it.
no.
I got it. Okay.
Okay, there we go.
All right, thank you. You know, I want to thank everyone for these excellent presentations. This is one of the best sessions we've had. And I just wanted to add that every 50 years, Hawaii seems to go through a tremendous change in its economy. You know, people thought that sugar and pineapple would be here forever, and then suddenly they were just gone, and there was tourism, and then people thought tourism would be here forever. And now maybe we're in the hydrogen age. Maybe hydrogen age is upon us, and this is another major change that we're on the cusp of. We've had such tremendous interest in this geothermal topic and in the cultural aspects of geothermal development in Hawaii that we decided to do a second session that Stan mentioned. And we're planning a session on geothermal in New Zealand and more geothermal information from the University of Hawaii. And I thank all of you for being with us and being part of Renew Rebuild Hawaii. And until the next time, aloha.
Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next month. Same time, same station. Aloha.
Half a day.